Now I want to get into the cognitive levels, which might help to clarify what we mean by objective and subjective. So, this is my take on it. All of human cognition, including the formal, such as geometric shapes and mathematics, can be reduced down to the simple binary or binocular mammalian form. Binary logic or dualism is the outcome of this binocular thinking, which emerges in carnivores or omnivores, hunters. Because if we think of it, the brain is a forager, a hunter of patterns. It feeds on patterns, it needs patterns. The organism's eyes become the base and the convergence point, the tip of a noetic triangle. The tip is the point in space-time, the objective. First level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's first level of intentionality. Consciousness, subjectivity of the first order, the primitive organism. The geometric line corresponds to this as a symbol. Then from this, the organism imagines, projects itself on that point and perceives itself perceiving. The organism has made of self a noetic point in space-time. This is the second level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's second level of intentionality. Self-consciousness, subjectivity of the second order, higher organisms, a triangle. Then the organism begins to imagine itself, imagine. A third party triangulating upon a point in space time. The two triangles side by side form a square or a rectangle. This is the third level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's third level of intentionality. Objectivity of the first order, advanced organism, a square. Then the organism begins to imagine itself, imagine a third party triangulating upon a point in space-time where all, including its own triangulation, are part of a whole. It has projected itself outside all triangulations. The organism can only perceive outwards, but now it imagines itself outside itself in the third cognitive level, and also behind itself and beside itself, around itself, creating a noetic circle, encircling a noetic point encompassing all these triangles. This is the fourth level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's fourth level of intentionality. Subjectivity of the third order, sophisticated organism, a circle. Then the organism begins to imagine itself, imagine a third party triangulating upon a point in space-time where all, including its own triangulation, are part of a whole, and it is above, looking down. It is twice removed. It has projected itself outside all triangulations and above this, outside. The organism can only perceive outwards, but now it imagines itself outside itself in the third cognitive level, and also behind itself and beside itself, around itself, creating a noetic circle, encircling a noetic point, encompassing all these triangles. This is the fifth level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's fifth level of intentionality. Objectivity of the first order, hypercognitive organism, a cube, prism, sphere. This is where the conceptions of a whole take place, where they are formed. Then the organism begins to imagine itself, imagine a third party triangulating upon a point in space-time where all, including its own triangulation, are part of a whole, and it is above, looking down. It is twice removed, but it is also perceiving itself looking down. It is thrice removed. It has projected itself outside all triangulations and above and outside this outside. The organism can only perceive outwards, but now it imagines itself outside itself in the third cognitive level, and also behind itself and beside itself, around itself, creating a noetic circle encircling a noetic point encompassing all these triangles, and it is detached from it all. This is the sixth level of cognition, corresponding to psychology's sixth level of intentionality, objectivity of the second order or hyper sophisticated organism, fluid spacetime thinking outside the confines of geometric shapes. A primitive mind psychology not yet having developed beyond the second level of cognition and second level of intentionality, triangulation, cannot dislodge itself, its emotions, prejudices, its still youthful self awareness from subjectivity. It is closer to animal. It projects this spotty yet intimate knowledge of self into the alien other, beginning the process of advancing further towards objectivity. Modern man, having advanced into the third level and beyond, still suffers from the inexperience and the anxiety this stimulates in him. Nihilism stifles his courage, exploits it. To stand firm, this courage to stand firm and move on. He is seduced by the idea of settling for the easy, the primitive, the seemingly certain, the path of least resistance. He stumbles back to the second level. That is easier, simpler, only daring to advance further when there is nothing personal, intimate at stake. Teeter-tottering between the two, he compartmentalizes his reasoning and is conveniently selective with the standards of his judgment. This is where he becomes schizophrenic. He becomes a child at play, calling this up down on a seesaw evidence of his balance. To comprehend the alien other, he uses his selective knowledge of self, projecting in this otherness his own best qualities, or the most neutral, if he wishes to pretend objectivity. He is immersed in a human, all too human world, with him at its center. Stones, water, wind, mud, all alive with himself, all moving with intent, with meaning, with purpose, no different than his own. He is in agreement with his own reason, in conflict with it, in alliance with it. He feels himself moving in all things, but thinks of them moving in him. He hears his mind speaking to him from afar, from a tree, from a river, from the soil. This is the bicameral mind, which James described. Consciousness still awakening to consciousness as if it were an other. Self-consciousness becoming conscious, whispering in the wind, code in the raindrops. The world is speaking to him in his own images, his own symbols, his own words, his heart beating and all. He is God. He is a God. He is with God. And this is comforting to him. In this case, geometry functions as a symbolic connection between noumenon and phenomenon, because after all, geometry is a symbol-based language. What is meant by objectivity is clarified as a cognitive advancement, detaching subjective emotions, sensations, interests, personal tastes, preferences from the observable other. The process involves self-awareness, so to then slowly reduce the corruption of subjectivity, used as a standard from the evaluation of the objective other. A process where courage, integrity, and self-knowledge are all essential factors, more so than processing speed and sensual acuity. And we will get further into this when we define the word empathy in relation to sympathy, because from here on in, my series will go into specific words and how they are defined today by moderns, by nihilists, and what their original definition was, how they connect to the world, and how now they are detached by the world, have become sacred, divine, because that's what moderns called the detachment. It's purified when it's released from its earthly connections. It becomes godlike. To understand how words can be converted from tools of engaging, relating to world, into toys, political ploys, of escaping world, of exploiting human weakness, of manipulating human psychology, we have to take words directly and see how they are understood today by the common man, the average man, how they are defined in the dictionary in order to facilitate communication, and what they actually mean in practice. So we begin with the word empathy. Now, empathy for the modern automatically and immediately means sympathy. They refuse to even consider antipathy as a component of empathy. For them to empathize with somebody is to immediately feel their pain, to relate to them on that level, and to relate to them positively. To feel somebody's pain is to share in it, to have an intimate connection, not an antipathetic where one rejects it or looks down upon it, but a sympathetic where one idolizes it or is compassionate towards it. Now, empathy is only possible in organisms with some level of self-consciousness, with the highest being the human. So the human can be considered the organism that we know of with the highest empathic potential. How does empathy work? Empathy takes self-knowledge, knowledge of self, and this is where corruption also occurs, because self-knowledge can be corrupted by emotions, by ego. One can inflate or deflate self to flatter self, or in cases where there's self-hatred, one may can self-hate and deflate self. So there's overestimation and underestimation occurring, not accurate evaluation. So the first component that is necessary is an accurate, in other words, an objective evaluation of self. Objective, that is perception of self as if it were an other from a detached point of view. So the organism, in this case the human, takes this knowledge of self and then sees similarities in another human or another organism, and then it imagines how this organism is feeling. It places itself within the mind of this organism and imagines itself as this organism, and now it can predict what the organism might do, how the organism might be feeling, why the organism is feeling that way. So we're talking about the third level of cognition, or the third level of psychological, in the psychology of intentionality. The organism enters through self the mind of the other and imagines what the intent of the other is by using appearances, how behavior, expressions of behavior, facial expressions, movements, and so on. So a high level of self-awareness has to be present for this to even begin. Now, in order to further clarify one's conception of other, one's understanding of other, one has to then gradually extricate whatever factors of self remain in the appreciation of other in degree. What do I mean by this? I mean that this original self-knowledge now projected into other has to be adjusted to the other so as to eliminate personal prejudices, personal motives, personal ego, for instance, personal emotions, personal reactions to the world, to stimuli. And in order to do this, integrity has to be present, and courage. And the process is painstaking and slow. The one truly interested in understanding other has to use self, again, as a standard, as the basis, the foundation to understand other, see the similarities in the other, and then adjust in quantity, in degree, so as to come closer to what the other is really like, and not to simply substitute other with himself. Because most people, what they do is they simply project self into the other's position. So they want to walk in their shoes. So they say, what if I were exactly in that situation? How would I feel? This is how they try to understand the other. But this is a corrupted method. It's not an accurate level. Simply putting yourself in somebody else's point is simply taking yourself and changing the circumstances. You're not really empathizing with the other. You're just imagining yourself if you were experiencing what the other person is experiencing. And this, like I said, is corrupted by ego, by self-interests, by prejudices, by personal individual ideals. In other words, by the mean. So sympathy or antipathy comes as a later reaction to empathy. So once the mind understands, has placed himself into the mind of the other, extricated the factors that belong to self, adjusted them to the other's circumstances by observing, then you have the secondary reaction, which is one of sympathy, of agreement, compassion, or one of antipathy, because you can empathize with somebody and feel antipathy towards him and his situation, or how he reacts to a certain situation. You can understand it and still not approve of it, or you may comprehend why the other did so, having put yourself in his place and eliminated yourself from the evaluation gradually, ascending towards the fourth and fifth levels of cognition, or psychological levels, fourth levels and fifth levels of intentionality. And then you evaluate, you judge this, returning back to your own ideals in reference to your ideals. And this is where you sympathize and you antipathize. This is not automatic. Only for the modern, infected by emotionalism, by nihilism, can empathy automatically and immediately mean sympathy. And this is not even the worst example of how words are corrupted. You can consider this a very naive, very innocent misunderstanding, one rooted in human fallibility, in human weakness, in human need. Some other words are purposely and willfully corrupted to mean something so strange, so surreal, that it has no meaning outside of social and economic and cultural context. In other words, the very definition of some of these words are only useful within the mean. If you take them outside the mean, or if you relate them to the gene, to genetic considerations, they are not only totally useless most of the time, they might even be self-damaging. They might be self-destructive.